Hello, I'm Lucas Vos and I'm happy you have chosen to watch my presentation today. Today I will be talking about lessons that we can learn as experimentation or CRO people nowadays from famous explorers from the past. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Lucas Vos and I'm working as a senior CRO specialist at RTL Netherlands. My mission is to bring an experimentation culture within the whole company. Before this, I've worked at large other companies like major newspaper NRC, Philips and TomTom. And as you will find out today, I have a special interest in history. Before I start, I want to give some more context about RTL. RTL is the biggest commercial broadcaster in the Netherlands and is part of a bigger company, RTL Group, which is active in the same sectors in other European countries like Germany and France. RTL Netherlands is also active in the streaming market with Videoland. Videoland is the second streaming service in the Netherlands, competing with #1 Netflix and even outperforming services like Disney Plus and HBO Max. A local player able to really compete with the big global players. Before we move into the explorers from history, I can imagine that the central theme of my talk today might bring some associations with some dark pages of human history. The ages of exploitation and slavery, horrific parts of these eras. So before I start to talk about the similarities and the things we can learn from explorers, I really want to express that this talk is not meant to justify any of these acts, that experimenters should do anything related to these horrific acts. Not at all. Having said that, now it's time to go back in time. Look at the guy standing on the globe on the chip. That's the experimenter. You could say the CRO person back in those days, pointing out to an area to explore, whilst lots of stakeholders have different opinions and expressing those. Yes, being an explorer was a difficult job these days, as life as an experimenter could be hard, sometimes hard as well. But when they were successful, they really found something. Recognizable? These kinds of similarities are the reason to dive a bit into the history of certain famous explorers, what we can learn from them. Any idea who this is? Yes, this is Christopher Columbus. Easy, right? Let me tell you the story of Christopher Columbus and why it is relevant for experimenters, and take you back into the 15th century. At the end of the 15th century, the age of exploration started, emerged from blockades in the Middle East, and the discovery of the caravel, which is a new lightweight ship which could be used for longer distances back in those days. Traveling over land to Asia got more risky during these decades, so people thought about alternatives. Among them was Christopher Columbus, and he thought sailing west would be a great alternative to reach India. He only lacked the money to go out and prove his point, so he needed a sponsor. He needed to go and convince royal houses like the House of Castile, Aragon, Portugal and many more to beg for money for his mission to validate this assumption. After many years and lots of determination, he eventually got his money from the Royal House of Castile, so he was able to begin his journey in 1492. And like we all know now, he didn't find a quicker route to India, but discovered a whole new continent. So what are his lessons for experimentation? The main lesson is about the need for a sponsorship that you needed to get traction for your experimentation program. Without sponsorship, we wouldn't recall Columbus' name. And that we need determination. You shouldn't give up easily, of course, like Columbus did not either. And at the end of the day, with experimentation, you always discover something, although it could be really something unexpected. Embrace that, because that can be your egg of Columbus, the simple solution for a complex problem. When we look at what we did at RTL with these lessons, at some point we got a sponsor to say our message instead of saying it ourselves. It boosted our efforts to get people on board. Sometimes you need to repeat your message over and over again to get traction. And we got, of course, our own surprise discovery. When we experimented with adding a login button to the main landing page to new subscribers, we were surprised to see that adding such a button for current subscribers was actually helping to increase conversion of not yet subscribers into subscribers. That was a pleasant surprise. Any idea who this is? Yes, it's easy again. This is Marco Polo. Let me tell you the story of Marco Polo and why it is relevant for experimenters, and take you back into the 13th century, to Venice. Marco Polo was born there in 1254 from a lineage of merchants, which were people traveling to all parts of the then known world. His father was a merchant, and Marco was destined to become one as well, like professions moved on from father to son those days. You might know Marco Polo as the writer of Il Milione, his book about his long journey to Asia and mainly China. A journey where he stayed for more than 70 years at the royal house of Kublai Khan, ruler of the Mongol Empire at the peak of it. In those days, it covered an empire from roughly modern-day Iran to the eastern parts of modern China. In his book, Polo wrote down lots of things about his experiences in mostly China, things we were not documented until then, and opened eyes for a lot of people. This book became very popular in the medieval world and inspired lots of other travelers to go to China. So what are Marco's lessons for us, experimenters? Basically, it comes down to documentation. Write down your learnings and share them with your stakeholders. And if you are able to make it a piece of inspiration, like Marco Polo did, it will get people into action to use your learnings. How did we bring these lessons into practice? We created an Airtable database to document all of our experiments, open for every colleague. But that's not enough, of course. You need to share your learnings actively. So we grabbed our stage and shared the most important experiment results in big meetings, so lots of colleagues heard about our learnings from experiments. And we organized an idea competition to get people really think about experimentation, which resulted in more than 100 great ideas and a lot of enthusiasm about experimentation, something we were very proud of. Any idea who this is? It might be a bit harder than the man I spoke about before, but this is Abel Tasman, one of the Dutch explorers. Let me tell you the story of Abel Tasman and why it is relevant for experimenters, and take you back into the 17th century to the Dutch East Indies and the Pacific. Abel Tasman is most probably not a name which will have high recognition, so he needs some more introduction. Tasman was employed by the United East India Company and got sent out of a mission at the heydays of its power in the 17th century to explore the Pacific area and to find new land to colonize. On that mission, he discovered Australia, New Zealand, and yes, Tasmania. That sounds like a success, right? But it doesn't cover the key elements of the story of Abel Tasman, so let me explain more. His mission was to find the Terra Australis, the name of an undiscovered continent explorers assumed to be somewhere in the Pacific, which would be rich in all kinds of natural resources, especially gold. So in 1642, Tasman was sent out to this area in the Southern Pacific, south of nowadays Indonesia, to find it. On a round trip, he discovered these areas, and he was the first European there. Whilst trying to map New Zealand, he and his crew tried to sail around it, but missed the strait in between, for example, because they didn't pay attention to the exact coastline. It seemed like a big continent for them, so they assumed they had found the Terra Australis, but they didn't disembark to really get out and check it. Returning to Batavia, nowadays Jakarta, his sponsors from the company were very disappointed because Tasman and his crew only scratched the surface a bit, didn't bring any resources, didn't bring any significance, and because they didn't go far enough. So in short, it wasn't a very quality discovery trip, resulting in lots of disappointment. Tasman was even removed from this position in the end. So what can we learn from Tasman then? We need to do more than scratch the surface and pay attention to the ones we're all doing it for. Also, we got our own Abel Tasman lessons and made our mistakes. Like we had experiments which looked positive at the beginning, but showed not to be that positive when we had a closer look at it. Experiments which showed an increase in incoming subscribers for Videoland, but didn't lift the net subscriber base, because those incoming subscribers unsubscribed within their trial period already. And we got sometimes into pretty serious and negative discussions with stakeholders, which could be prevented if we had paid more attention to their interest. So good to take that into account. Moving on to the last one already. Any idea who this is? A hint, it's a more famous one than the last one. Somewhat more opposite than that of Tasman. This is James Cook. It's a famous British explorer. Let me tell you his story and why it is relevant for experimenters, and take you back into the 18th century, to the heydays of the British Empire. James Cook was born as the son of a poor farmer and worked himself up to the position of commander. In his early career, Cook got in contact with cartography and showed enormous talent in it. In the 7 Years' War in the mid-18th century between France and England, he was sent out to Canada and mapped the St. Lawrence River for them. His detailed map made it possible for the British Navy to surprise the French during the Battle of Quebec, which led to the British winning this battle. After that, he got sent out to the Pacific for big exploration missions, where he thoroughly mapped big parts of the Southern Pacific and especially New Zealand, like the strait in between the Northern and Southern Island, nowadays the Cook Strait. Because he was so good and exact in cartography, his influence was tangible for ages. James Cook's major lesson is that quality pays off. It got him from being a poor farmer towards being commander on major missions for the British Navy. He made it possible for others to easily work with his standards, his maps. And being the opposite of Abel Tasman, he showed great attention to details, finding, for example, the Cook Strait, and with that falsified the assumption of New Zealand being the Terra Australis. What did we do to bring it into practice? That's the following. We created standard monitoring sheets for our experiments and saved lots of time in analyzing them. These helped us to automate lots of manual and repetitive tasks, saving time to be able to go into depth more. Also, we added quality checks, like checks on sample ratio mismatch, to prevent conclusions based on wrong data. And we added focus through choosing a primary KPI for every experiment. Lessons that improved our experimentation quality. So, like the explorers, now it's time to reflect on our learnings, like they do when they go back to the harbor where they left. What is our main takeaway? Comparing explorers from history to experimenters and optimizers. Experimentation is very comparable to exploration. So we can learn from the approach of those famous explorers, that you cannot make real progress without a good sponsor, and that it could be hard to find one, and that it is very valuable to document and share your learnings, and that you need to really focus on your customers, also internally, and not only on your own KPIs. And last but not least, providing quality pays off in the long term. Time to wrap up and let you work with those learnings, to encourage you to set your sails to explore, without the exploitation and slavery, of course. This marks the end of my talk, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact me through email or Twitter, or connect with me on LinkedIn. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.